If you or someone you know lives with fibromyalgia, you are all too familiar with the frustrating search for a treatment that actually works. Well, it turns out some of the most common treatments out there don't have much scientific backing, while a few, older drugs are the ones that really seem to make a difference. So today, we're going to dive into the latest scientific evidence to separate what really works from what doesn't when it comes to fibromyalgia medications. All right, let's just get on the same page. At its heart, fibromyalgia is all about chronic, widespread pain. But as anyone living with it will tell you, it is so much more than that. We're talking about a deep, draining fatigue and sleep that just never feels refreshing. The whole combination can seriously derail a person's quality of life. It's a tough reality for millions. And that leads us right to the big question, right? You're facing this sea of treatment options, prescriptions, over-the-counter stuff, you name it. So which ones are actually supported by solid, reliable science? Well, that's exactly what a group of top experts decided to find out once and for all. To get a real answer, you can't just rely on one person's opinion. You need a rock-solid process to build a consensus based on the best research we have. So let's take a look at how they managed to find some clarity in all that noise. They used this really rigorous 5-step system called BC. First, they did a massive search for every high-quality study they could find. Then, a panel of experts carefully analyzed everything, picking out the most relevant research. From there, they classified the strength of the evidence, and finally, used all of that to build their official recommendations. It's a super systematic and thorough approach. And here's the thing that really gives their findings weight. For any recommendation to make the final cut, it had to get at least 70% agreement from a panel of 22 different fibromyalgia experts. That is a high bar, and it means the final guidelines are based on a strong, shared agreement, not just a simple majority. Okay, so after that incredibly rigorous process, what actually made the list? Let's get right into the yes list. These are the medications that are officially recommended because they're backed by strong scientific evidence. First on the list is a medication that's actually been around for quite a while, but it's really stood the test of time and the research, amitriptyline. It's what's known as a tricyclic antidepressant, which basically means it works on balancing certain chemicals in the brain that help regulate things like mood and, crucially, pain. Now, looking at the specifics here is really telling. The evidence shows amitriptyline is effective for two of the absolute biggest issues in fibromyalgia, pain and sleep problems. It does this by tweaking those key neurotransmitters. But, and this is important, it's not a free lunch. You do have to consider the common side effects, like dry mouth or potential weight gain. Next up, we have a class of drugs called SNRIs. That stands for serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. The name's a mouthful, but the idea is simple. They increase the levels of two key messengers in your brain that play a big role in mood, energy, and pain signals. The two that have strong evidence are duloxetine and milnacipran. For duloxetine, the consensus found that a 60 milligram dose seems to be the sweet spot, giving you a good balance of moderate pain relief without overwhelming side effects. But things like nausea or dizziness are pretty common, and they can be a deal breaker for some people. And just a quick note, milnacipran is also shown to be effective. It's just not available everywhere. And rounding out the yes list is pregabalin. Now, this is an anticonvulsant, which means it was originally developed to treat seizures. But it turns out it's also really effective for the kind of nerve-related pain signaling that is a huge part of fibromyalgia. Okay, this table might look a bit clinical, but it is an awesome way to see the real-world trade-offs. Let me break it down. NNT, or number needed to treat, tells us how many people have to take a drug for just one person to get significant pain relief. So here, a lower number is better. NNH, or number needed to harm, is the flip side. How many people take the drug before one person has to stop because of side effects? For that one, a higher number is better. So you can see pregabalin has a slight edge on pain relief, but a much higher risk of side effects compared to something like duloxetine. All right, now we get to what might be the most surprising part of this whole thing. Let's talk about the very common treatments that did not get an official recommendation from this expert panel. This is the no and maybe list. First up, NSAIDs. Things like ibuprofen or naproxen. For many types of pain, they're the first thing we reach for. But the consensus here is crystal clear. They are not recommended for fibromyalgia. Why? Well, because the evidence shows they just don't really work. Fibromyalgia isn't primarily an inflammatory condition, so these drugs just aren't targeting the right problem. This next one is absolutely critical. Opioids are also not recommended. And in this case, the research goes even further than just showing a lack of benefit. It actually links long-term opioid use in fibromyalgia patients to worse outcomes. We're talking more pain, poor function, and even more severe depression. And the list of treatments that just don't have enough solid proof is actually pretty long. It includes SSRI antidepressants, which only showed very modest effects. It also includes cannabinoids, low-dose naltrexone, IV therapies, and benzodiazepines. For all of these, the expert panel basically said, look, there just isn't enough high-quality scientific evidence to give these a formal thumbs up right now. But the researchers included a really important piece of context here, and I think it's worth reading. They say that just because something isn't on the yes list doesn't automatically mean it's useless for every single person. It just means it hasn't met the incredibly high standard of consistent, robust scientific proof they required for this specific consensus. So after digging into all these different medications, what's the big final takeaway? Let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture for actually managing this incredibly complex condition. And here it is, maybe the single most important conclusion from the entire study. Medication by itself is not enough. While the drugs we've talked about can definitely help manage symptoms, they are only one single piece of a much, much larger puzzle. And this shows us what the rest of that puzzle looks like. The paper hammers home the point that the best results happen when medication is combined with these other non-drug strategies. Things like physical activity, simply educating people about their own condition, and psychosocial support. These are considered absolutely essential parts of a complete treatment plan. Which really leaves us with this one big final thought. Maybe the goal here isn't about finding that one magic pill that's going to fix everything for everyone. Maybe the real future of treating fibromyalgia effectively is about something much more personal. Finding that unique combination of medication, movement, and support that actually works for each individual person.